All right, it looks like we've got just about everybody with us today, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Cindy Clowner. I'm the Managing Director of the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery. And as I mentioned before, we're thrilled to have everybody with us today, and we're excited to have both Kyle Pendleton from Zeta Tau Alpha Fraternity and Dr. Molly Downing and Brittany Sandidge from the Generation RX program in the College of Pharmacy at The Ohio State University to give you a little bit more information about a grant opportunity that is being made available through a generous partnership with the Zeta Tau Alpha Fraternity Foundation. Before we get started, we do have a couple of housekeeping items. One is we just want to let you know that registration is open for the national meeting this year. The national meeting is virtual again, taking place August 2nd through the 5th, with pre-recorded sessions being made available the week prior. We're so excited about the lineup that we'll be announcing soon, and we'd love for you to learn a little bit more about the conference and get registered by visiting the website below. You can go to our website, HECAOD.osu.edu, and click on the National Meeting tab to learn more about this year's conference. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our presenters. Kyle Pendleton works for the Zeta Tau Alpha Fraternity, and Brittany Sandidge and Dr. Molly Downing are with Generation RX. I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves a little bit and get started. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cindy, and good afternoon, everybody. Kyle Pendleton, I'm the Senior Director of Harm Reduction and University Relations, and I've been with Zeta Tau Alpha for almost 10 years. I'll celebrate my 10-year anniversary in August. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed during my time is Zeta Tau Alpha and the Zeta Tau Alpha Foundation has always prioritized funding of educational grants to advance prevention messaging on campuses within fraternity and sorority communities. And when we first started working with Generation RX and the Higher Ed Center in 2017, we were so impressed with the resources that were available that the foundation wanted to advance that and committed to funding grant monies to campus fraternity and sorority life offices and AOD wellness offices. One of the things that we were definitely wanting to prioritize was to promote a partnership with fraternity and sorority life in an area on campus that focused on something other than just alcohol. This collaboration is a great way to highlight how Generation RX resources are both universal and adaptable to specific audiences. Molly and I were lucky enough to get to work with Michigan State a couple of months ago, and it was a collaboration between the Fraternity and Sorority Life Office and their Veteran Services Office with Generation RX. So we've been excited to see campuses use these materials and help educate their campus communities on the importance of medication safety. And right now, particularly with COVID and the pandemic, the increased stress and uncertainty has led us to really prioritize and understand that these resources and education is more important than ever. In fact, we worked with our partners to develop a 4th module for Generation RX that was launched this past year that was on prescription sedatives, and the materials were updated and made to be able to use virtually. So we were really excited for all of that in the past year. In addition to that, this grant last year, because of COVID, we kind of took a year off. And so the 5-year commitment was with $1,000 for 5 campuses over the years. But because we took kind of a pause, this final year of the grant, there will be 10 campuses that are awarded the $1,000. And it will support all the dissemination and use of the materials on your campus. And we just fund it. It's a great partnership, but it's all administered through the Higher Ed Center and their team. So it's been really great to see the campuses use those. And if you want to see some of the campuses that have received the grants, you can see year 1 was 17-18 up to last year. And one thing about the grants and the campuses, you do not have to have a Zeta chapter in order to receive a grant. In fact, several of these do not have Zeta chapters, and we have a diverse set of campuses that have received the grants over the past 3 years. So we're looking forward to adding 10 more campuses to this list. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brittany, and she can delve more into the grant itself.
Thank you so much, Kyle, and thank you, Cindy, for kicking us off. My name is Brittany Sandidge. I'm the program manager for Generation RX. We're housed at Ohio State University in the College of Pharmacy. And for those who may be slightly less familiar with our program, we are focused on teaching safe medication practices for life. And what that means is that we are endeavoring to show communities and support educators, campuses, and community-based services with the tools they need to address prescription drug misuse and make sure that they can educate about what the safe use of medications are. We all know that medications are a part of our day-to-day life. And so what we try to do with Generation RX is create developmentally appropriate, really friendly resources that we develop in combination with many of our partners. And I'm so excited to be here today because in working with Kyle and Cindy and with many other campus partners, we not only can bring a university toolkit that is very appropriately designed with best practices in engagement, with best practices in prevention education, but also can be field tested. And we get to ensure that what we're bringing to you has been tried and used and successful out in the field. So Generation RX, just to kind of highlight what the university toolkit specifically is going to be focused on. This is intended for universal population, so this can be used across your entire campus. It is not necessarily targeting a specific group or a specific subset. This really should be an environmentally friendly approach to getting a prevention message out there. And throughout the course of the education, what your participants will learn through peer-delivered education, they'll really get to understand the dangers and the consequences from misusing prescription medications. So we make sure they know what those are so they can make informed decisions for themselves. And we then empower them with the skills and the knowledge to make sure they can promote safe medication use within their small circles, for themselves, their social circle, and beyond on the campus. So we really truly emphasize through this particular toolkit, one of our 5, the concept of safe medication practices, how that they can turn down those skills to misuse, and then of course the healthy and safe ways that they can deal with some of the most common causes for misuse, demands of life, the stressors, and some of the things that we see as common drivers of misuse among the university population. So I have the great pleasure of working with Dr. Molly Downing, who has helped to design so many of our resources and works with communities. I'm going to let her take you through a little bit more of the detail of what this toolkit and this opportunity looks like.
Well, thank you, Brittany and Kyle and Cindy, and it is great to be with you all today. Real quickly, just to introduce myself, I serve as the Associate Director of Generation RX, and I'm also a faculty member in the College of Pharmacy at Ohio State. And our College of Pharmacy is a supporting partner of the Higher Education Center. And so I have the privilege to serve as part of the staff of that center and support their prescription drug misuse prevention and recovery efforts. And what that means for this grant is that HECAOD does provide that administration support for this grant. And so I am kind of the contact person that campus grantees work with throughout the year to just talk through your plans, your challenges, any questions you have about meeting the grant requirements or using the Generation RX resources. So I kind of wear both hats, but know that we will be a partner and come alongside you throughout the duration of the grant, and primarily would be working with me. Speaking of the grant timeline, I wanted to showcase that now so you can keep it in mind as we walk through the proposal and the requirements, which is what I'm hoping to do with some of our remaining time today. So the application is due on Friday, May 28th. Notices of award will be sent on July 2nd, and then signed assurances are due for recipients only on September 3rd. And then a final report is due at the end of May, so looking at May 27th of 2022. And historically, Kyle referenced the past campus grantees. The way that most campuses have operated is that they've kind of broken it up into the autumn and the spring semesters. And so many campuses use the autumn semester to plan the programming and ensure they're going to meet the grant requirements and conduct any training that may be needed for those peer educators or for the staff delivering the educational programs. And then they typically hit the ground running in the spring and implement the required educational program. So that's certainly not a required way to use your time, but just an example of how many campuses have kind of leveraged the 9 months or so of the grant. So at this time, I want to kind of dive into the grant requirements and walk you through a couple of the questions on the grant proposal and give you a little bit of insight. But I want to make sure that you feel comfortable asking any questions. So feel free to throw any questions at any point into the chat thread, or you can use the Q&A feature. And Cindy is here to ask those questions on your behalf. So Cindy, I'm going to pause. Do we see any questions that may make sense for me to address now before we dive into the details of the grant?
You know, one question came in since you mentioned that a number of campuses separate this in terms of semesters. A question to follow up on that is, do you have campuses that have been rolling this out that are on quarters or terms, and how might that look different?
So I have not directly worked with, I can't say a campus where they've kind of informed me of how they've utilized it in terms of that timeline. Kyle, do you know of any?
I'm looking at the list. I don't know if we've had any differentiation between semesters and quarters, because at the end of the day, there's just the time frame for you to do the workshops and programs. And it does, I don't think it would really matter if you're on semesters or quarters as to that timeline or how you utilize it. It's up to you.
Yeah, and we've even seen programming happen in the fall. It really determines, I think, what audiences do you want to engage. Sometimes there are just campus events that take place throughout the academic year that they want to provide educational programming at. And so they'll ensure that they're ready for that event. So let us know if that doesn't answer your question, and we can try to provide a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to kind of walk through the grant requirements. So one of the fundamental requirements is that the grant proposal is accepted from the Office of, the Office of Student Wellness or other campus unit that houses prevention services. Okay, and so if we look at our requirements, the first one is, I want to spend a little bit of time on that because it is kind of the bulk of the grant requirements. So at least 10 educational programs need to be offered using the Generation RX University resources. And as Brittany and Kyle both referenced, these resources that we have are available for both in-person and virtual programming. Okay, so you can pick the delivery modality of your choice. And you can have some programs be for virtual and some in person. So it's really, the resources are there to kind of meet the needs of your individual campus and where you think you may be throughout the fall and spring semesters. One of the requirements is that 7 of those 10 educational programs have to be within the fraternity and sorority community or individual chapters. And an attendance requirement for all 10 programs is that a majority percentage of the membership of the targeted student groups attend each presentation. So in the beginning of the grant period, typically in August, we'll have kind of a kickoff meeting. And one of the resources that I'll provide you with is the final report. And it contains a table where you can keep track of your 10 educational programs, and you can keep track of the attendance to ensure that you're kind of meeting that requirement. If we look at the second requirement, it says a collaborative partnership with the fraternity and sorority life department is required. As Kyle mentioned, really the spirit of this funding mechanism was brought about because we wanted to provide opportunities for partnerships to be cultivated across the Office of Student Wellness and the sorority and fraternity life departments. And that's really where the requirement of 7 of those 10 educational programs engage students within the fraternity and sorority community, because we really want to provide opportunities for those partnerships to be cultivated and hopefully sustained past this grant cycle. So because of the requirement to engage students within the audience, we do ask for a brief letter of support from the Fraternity and Sorority Life Department be included with your application. And it's, again, it can be very brief. You don't need to necessarily need to identify an extensive list of all the details of how you may partner over the upcoming year. But it's really, they're just pledging that their support and that they will be working with you to help you implement at least 7 of those 10 required educational programs. Certainly, if you know the details of the partnership and how you're going to work together and collaborate, they can certainly share them. But just that brief letter is required. The third requirement that you can see here relates to evaluation of the 10 educational programs. And we do ask for a survey, a post-program survey to be completed by the participating students. And the Higher Education Center takes or develops that survey instrument. It's administered through Qualtrics. And one of the resources that I'll provide you with in August is a customized link to your specific Qualtrics survey. So that link will be customized to the name of your institution. And you will have an opportunity to meet with the Generation RX team and just ensure that any questions you have related to evaluation are answered. And the other thing with those evaluation surveys is that we handle all of the data analysis. And if you're interested in receiving a report of those outcomes, then we certainly are happy to share those outcomes with you at the end of the grant year. And then lastly, a final project report is submitted. So that is due at the end of May in 2022. And again, it really just summarizes the project, how you utilized the funds, the number of programs that you offered, the number of students reached through those programs and challenges that you experienced, as well as your interest in continuing to partner with the campus units that you worked with over this grant period to continue to support your prescription drug misuse prevention efforts. So as Kyle mentioned, 10 grants of $1,000 will be awarded. And this is the link that you can find the application at. Again, it's formatted in Qualtrics. And I think Cindy is dropping that in the chat thread for us. Any questions about the requirements before we kind of dive into some of the questions that you'll find on that application? Any questions?
We have one question regarding the attendance requirement for the 3 programs that you don't do just within fraternity and sorority life. What if a student group co-sponsors the program? And it's really open for any student in a more general way. So can it be a general program, or does it need to target a specific audience that is not fraternity and sorority life? I think is what this question is asking. What is the attendance requirement? Can you speak a little bit more about how a campus would be able to identify whether the program meets the attendance requirement or not?
Yeah, so I would say that the attendance requirement, I think, is more important when we are kind of targeting specific groups. So if you think about those 7 programs that engage students in fraternity and sorority life, for example, if you're presenting to an individual chapter, ensuring that you meet the attendance requirement is important. Similarly, if you're presenting to maybe outside of the fraternity and sorority community, so it's student athletes, and you know that there's a defined number of athletes, hitting their attendance requirements is important there. I can tell you that some campuses provide just a program to anyone on campus, right? So they open it up to kind of a more universal undergraduate student population audience. And in that kind of situation, we would not expect for you to have the majority of your student population attend. I think just as efforts made for you to yield a strong participation by the student body would be great, but we understand that there's limitations as it relates to attendance when we go outside of very specific groups. Is that, Kyle, do you want to speak to that at all?
I think, yeah, that's a great answer. And, we really look at the attendance requirement more when you're doing it with fraternity and sorority population, because, that's the first question any chapter or chapter leader asks when you're doing a program. What's the attendance requirement, right? So we knew that we had to have something in there for the fraternity and sorority life folks and that incentive. But when you're doing the general populations, it's like a majority or just, a good number. We're not sticklers on that percentage requirement outside of the fraternity and sorority groups.
Yeah, and you can always, let's say if you are experiencing challenges with trying to meet this attendance requirement and you're having to, you're providing your 12th, 13th, 14th program and you're just not getting it. Again, this is where you can email me. We can get Kyle on the phone, especially if it's within a group within the fraternity and sorority community. We can help you troubleshoot that challenge or think about how we can modify that particular requirement to support you. Okay, so when you access the grant application, these are the questions that you'll be asked to submit responses for. And what I want to do is really kind of take a little bit of time to give you some insight related to the first two questions or the first two bullets. And I'll hit on the last bullet as well. Some of these other questions are a little bit more specific to you and the needs of your campus, but I can provide a little bit of insight related to these first two bullets that may help you craft your responses. So the first question asks for you to provide an overview of your proposed project, including details of how you intend to promote and deliver the 10 required educational programs, the Generation RX resources that you intend to utilize, and how the funding will be spent. The second bullet asks about the audiences that you intend to target during the project and what is your plan for engaging them. So remember that for 7 of the 10 programs, the audience will need to include students within the fraternity and sorority community. If you want all 10 of the programs to engage that community, that is great. But if you maybe already have partnerships with other campus units and you want to engage students outside of the fraternity and sorority community for the other 3 required programs, please feel free to do that. Or maybe this grant is an opportunity for you to cultivate other partnerships. So maybe it's with Residence Life or student athletics or a campus unit that you've been wanting to partner with, and this is an opportunity. So I'm going to walk you through a couple things over the next few slides to help you answer these 2 questions or get a sense of what does this project look like for you. And the first piece of information I want to give you a little bit more context around are the Generation RX resources. So our resources are free and can be anyone can download them and utilize them. And they are housed on our website, which is generationrx.org. And hopefully everyone is seeing the website right now. If you're not, let us know and I'll see what I'm not doing. But if you go to generationrx.org, where you can find the resources that we want to be utilizing through this grant, you go to toolkits and you click university, you'll land on this page. So as Brittany mentioned, Generation RX as a national prevention program really teaches safe medication practices across the lifespan. So this is kind of our lifespan here. So we just want you to focus on that university page. And the website right now is kind of laid out in a linear fashion. So if you scroll down, it's just one single page. There's no navigating to multiple pages to access our resources, okay? In the very top, you can see that there's actually 8 sections to this particular page where our university resources are housed. There's only a couple sections that you need to focus on in order to really think through your project and what resources you may want to utilize. And that's what I want to kind of highlight. So the first section that I would encourage you to review is section 4, activities for fraternity and sorority life, okay? So when you're thinking of what resources do I want to use to complete those 7 required programs, this may be the section that you really think through to think about what Generation RX resources do I want to present during those 7 programs? Do I want to do it virtual, in person? What does that look like? For the other 3 required programs, if you are going to engage students outside of the fraternity and sorority community, then consider reviewing the resources in section 2 and section 3. This is where we house our resources in the toolkit that are for more universal audiences. And they're organized based upon delivery modality. So if you think you want to conduct an in-person program, if your campus is headed back in that direction, then focus on section 2. If you think virtual programming is a better option, then you can focus on the resources in section 3, okay? So I'm just gonna walk us through each of those sections quickly, and feel free at any point, if you have questions, let me know. So I'm gonna start with section 4, which houses our resources or activities for fraternity and sorority life. And you can kind of follow me in this context that we lay out here. Essentially, we have a single activity for the educational program to engage fraternity and sorority life. But the activity can be highly flexible in terms of its delivery and the messages emphasized to meet your needs, right? And that's what I want to showcase. So this activity, the way that it's structured is that it utilizes videos to provide an overview of the Generation RX University messages, okay? So as such, the program itself is going to allow for conversations that relate to the misuse of prescription opioids, sedatives, and stimulant medications. So the 3 most commonly misused classes of medications, as well as some general guidelines on safe medication taking practices, all right? Now, the single activity can be delivered either in person or virtually. So again, you have flexibility in the delivery modality. You can think about what makes the most sense for you and your campus. And this is some additional information to help you kind of plan that program. So the first link is called a Getting Started Guide. And I would highly encourage you to access this PDF and read through it, as it will help you think about how are you going to actually deliver these programs, what training may be needed. It'll pose questions about example audiences that you can engage within the fraternity and sorority community, what partners you may want to bring on board, etc. The second link here is titled Activity and Slide Deck. So the activity is called an Orientation to Generation RX University. And the structure, as I mentioned, is participants will form small groups and they will watch a brief video that's about 3 minutes long related to a topic. So for example, the first module is focused on prescription opioids. And then there is a slide deck here formatted as a PowerPoint presentation where the facilitator can showcase a couple discussion questions, maybe 3 discussion questions. So in the small group, the participants or the students will reflect on the ideas presented in the video, reflect on their own understanding of the questions being posed, and just have kind of an engaging and authentic conversation. And then the facilitator can bring everyone back as a larger group and utilize this slide deck to support a large group conversation, okay? So I would encourage you to pull up the PowerPoint slide deck and take a look at it. The facilitator talking points is the last hyperlink. I'll just quickly access it. But basically, it's here to support the facilitators delivering the program. So on the left, you'll see a screenshot of the different slides in the PowerPoint presentation. And then on the right is our talking points. Some facilitators feel more comfortable. They have more of a kind of narrated script. Others just need kind of guided talking points. So again, it's here for the facilitator and in whatever means they need it. But this is something that you can utilize as you're thinking about who's going to be delivering the program, and recognize that there are resources here to support those facilitators. Okay, so if we go back to the website itself, sorry, I'm just gonna. I can never get rid of this panel. Oh, there we go. It's hiding it's hiding the tabs at the top. Okay, so that is the activity itself. And I would encourage you, after you kind of go through the activity, look at the facilitator talking points, I would also encourage you to access this getting started guide that I mentioned. So again, this resource can really help you plan those 7 educational programs to engage fraternity and sorority-led communities. As you scroll through, it highlights the structure of the activity. So again, we said that the way that the activity is structured is that participants are going to watch a video, and then they're going to engage in a brief conversation related to a specific topic. So that first topic is prescription opioids, and then they move into stimulants, sedatives, and safe medication practices. But again, based upon the audience that you want to engage, maybe you just want to have a conversation around prescription opioids and safe medication practices, and the activity will allow you to pull out and just focus on, we're just going to work through module 1 and module 4 today. Okay, so again, you can think about how you can adapt the delivery of the activity to meet the needs of your audience. And it's okay for you to identify that this is the activity you're going to use in those 7 programs. And once you talk with representatives from the audiences you want to engage, you'll select the specific modules that you're going to deliver. Okay. But I would encourage you to work through the guide. There's an entire page that focuses on what you need to be doing if you want to deliver the activity in person, discussion techniques, same types of guidelines for virtual delivery. So it really is a nice resource to support you as you think through how you want to conduct those 7 educational programs. We also have a flyer that can support promoting the program. You can easily adapt it. And then there's also a handout if that's something that makes sense for you as well. Okay, those are our activities for fraternity and sorority life. So again, if you want to engage this audience for all 10 programs, that's completely fine. That's wonderful. If you want to move outside of this community for the other 3 required programs, then I would encourage you to scroll up and see what resources we have in sections 2 and 3. Okay, so I mentioned that they're organized based upon the delivery modality. So section 2 houses the resources and the toolkit for in-person programming, and section 3 houses resources for virtual programming. And you can see in this section, there's 4 activities. That's what's in navy, the title of the activities, 4 activities that you can deliver for in-person programming. These same activities have been adapted for virtual delivery, okay? So it may be that you can just pick one activity, and with some audiences, it may make sense to conduct it in person, and other audiences, you deliver it virtually. You're only going to need to receive kind of training once because the activity is the same. It's just the way that the language is crafted and the guidelines for delivery are a little bit different to work with your delivery modality. Okay, so I'm just going to focus on walking you through the resources listed under in-person programming, but know that some of the information I'm giving you is identical if you want to deliver it virtually. Okay, so the 4 activities we have here, again, these activities are really designed for universal audiences. So as Brittany mentioned, think about the entire campus community. And I will tell you that the way that some activities have been utilized are a little more popular with some audiences than others. So for example, the trivia game, the key messages in the trivia game really focus on that broad safe medication practices or general medication safety education. And so we have seen oftentimes campuses that want to engage students, first-year students or students in residence life, leverage this trivia game because they just want to have that general conversation about safe medication practices. So again, the hyperlinks provide the activity itself and the facilitator talking points to support delivery. The next activity that's available for universal audiences is very specific to the opioid epidemic. So as you look at the key messages delivered in this activity, it's going to walk you through just specific issues related to this drug class. So discussing potential risks, guidance on safe use if prescribed by a healthcare provider, and action steps to take in a drug overdose situation. So again, here's the activity, here's the facilitator talking points. This is much more of a discussion-oriented activity. And this is, I've seen this probably the most utilized if you are engaging student athletes, because the athletic directors really want you to, historically, they've wanted us to have conversations that are more specific to pain management and prescription opioids. So if they really just want you to focus in on that topic, this might be the activity that works best for that audience. Similarly, we have an activity that solely focuses on discussing the misuse, risks associated with the misuse of prescription stimulants. And we hear a lot from students that they just need some help on thinking about how do they handle those challenging situations, and what are some sustainable ways that they can kind of achieve academic success. So this is an activity that, again, is very exclusively focused on kind of the issues that surround the specific issues and nuances that surround the misuse of prescription stimulants. So we do see this commonly used if a campus is engaging, again, those first year students, maybe students in living in residence life. I've seen it utilized in kind of orientation weeks, or it can be utilized and adapted around very specific kind of times during the semester. So maybe a few weeks before finals, or maybe at the very beginning of the semester. So there's different ways and in different places throughout the academic year where conversations related to many of these ideas in this activity are relevant. And then the last activity that we have is an orientation to Generation RX University. So it is highly similar to the activity that is specific to our fraternity and sorority life community that I mentioned in section 4. In fact, it is structured the same way. It utilizes the same videos. It has discussion opportunities. It's just that the language utilized in this activity is more universal in nature. And we also ensure that the kind of scenarios and examples are relevant for more universal audiences. But again, if you want to engage a universal audience, let's say that you're partnering with Residence Life and they're like, well, collectively, we think it's important that you have conversations related to prescription opioid misuse and stimulant misuse and sedative misuse and general safe medication practices. Like, we want you to talk about it all. This would be the activity for you, okay? So again, here's the activity. Here's those facilitator talking points to support delivery. And then if you go up to section 1, the other resource I would want to mention is there is a general facilitator guide that introduces folks to our university toolkit and can support you in different ways, much like the guide that we see that we created for our fraternity and sorority life community. The other resource I wanted to reference is this introductory letter. So this is an editable file. And as you're thinking through those questions on the proposal about the other campus units that you may engage and how may you begin to kind of plan for these programs, this letter can assist you with introducing the purpose of the Generation RX program. And it may help to start those conversations around cultivating some of those partnerships. So if that is something that makes sense for you, just know that that resource is here. And then the other thing I just want to mention before we kind of go back to the slide deck and look at the grant proposal is if you scroll all the way down to section 5, we do have some visual aids that campuses have leveraged to extend the reach and extend those key messages that you'll be talking about in those 10 educational programs. And that can be part of your project too, is thinking about that may even be how you want to spend some of your funds. So outside of those 10 educational programs, there may be some events on your campus that you really want to disseminate these messages through. And if any of these visual aids can support you in that process, know that they're here for use as well, okay? All right, so I know that was a lot of information. So I'm going to pause before I kind of walk you through some of the other parts of the grant proposal and see if there's any questions about the resources themselves.
We did have a couple of questions come in. Two of them are very similar. Can you use the funds from this grant to subsidize Narcan for an opioid overdose prevention training? And the other question is, are there any modules that address naloxone?
So I'll answer the second question, and then I'll let Kyle answer the first one, if that's okay, Kyle. So the second, and I guess I'll just speak. The second question is yes. So if you're looking at the activity that was created exclusively for fraternity and sorority communities, the module that focuses on prescription opioids, there's conversation around naloxone, harm reduction, utilizing naloxone as a harm reduction strategy, and how to take action in a drug overdose situation. The module focused on prescription sedatives, and that activity also makes a connection to thinking about synthetic opioids and illegally manufactured fentanyl. And so it reinforces the use of naloxone as a harm reduction strategy there. And then those same messages, you would see that in the resources for universal audiences. So that orientation activity that hits on all of the topics, and then the activity that's specifically focused on prescription opioids. So same messages are discussed there. Kyle, do you want to address the first question?
Sure. Yeah, when you think about your budget and what you're submitting the money to be used for, I would caution you not to direct it towards naloxone, just because the intent of the grant is to fund the Generation RX program and the implementation of that program with your campus populations, not for side resources or projects. So I can think of things in the past that we've nixed from applications like medication lock boxes, and then Narcan and other things like that that aren't necessarily necessary for the implementation of the program. We look more towards promotion, food, giveaways, materials. Those are the type of things that we look for in the budgets.
In just a moment, I'll share some examples of how past campus grantees have spent those funds to give you some more tangible examples, if that's helpful as well. Okay, so before I do that, let me just quickly share some of the outcomes from the last year that we were able to administer this grant, as it may help you answer some of the responses or maybe get some buy-in to apply for this grant. So this is part of the post-program evaluation that participants will complete. And I've just pulled, instead of the kind of Likert scale statements, I've pulled the two self-reported open-ended questions at the end of that survey. And one is students reporting the knowledge that they feel they gained due to that Generation RX program. So what did they feel that they learned? And what we really see is a pretty even breakdown across kind of 4 different spaces. So if you focus on the green, 22% indicate new prevention and misuse knowledge. And this is really captured through safe medication practices. So this is an example here in the speech bubble at the bottom of one student reporting that's a representative kind of sample of, in this case, I shouldn't share any prescription medication, but they indicate knowledge gains related to those safe medication practices. Another 22% report knowledge gains that are more specific to the individualized prescription medications that we're discussing. So around prescription opioids, stimulants, sedatives, but also the interactions that those medications can have with alcohol. And so this is, again, a representative example of what students are reporting, that they recognize that there's some dangerous risks with mixing alcohol and prescription medications. Another 20% report specific information related to medication storage and disposal. This is part of the Generation RX key messages. So teaching students how to safely store and dispose of their medication. And you'll see in our programming that we really recommend lockable spaces that are kind of out of sight from others, and then proper ways to dispose of our medication through both kind of community based programs, but also at home if that's what's needed. And then another 20% report knowledge gains related to the consequences and risks associated with medication misuse behaviors. And this is where we see oftentimes misperceptions being addressed, particularly around legality. So a recognition that misuse is illegal and other potential risks associated in engaging with those behaviors. We do see a small percentage report knowledge gains related to that not to misuse medication, and then another percentage related to taking action in a drug overdose situation, that they're learning how to actually do that. And again, that information, as I shared, is in 2 other resources. So sometimes based upon what activity you might be presenting, that particular topic may or may not be fully discussed. The other outcomes I wanted to share is self-reported behavioral intentions. So after leaving the Generation RX program, students reported, because of this program, I will what? So what are they kind of walking away with? So again, 35% or roughly a third are indicating that they'll avoid high-risk situations or pledging to not misuse medications. So again, kind of a representative example from one student shown here. Almost 20% are reporting that they'll share information learned with others. So we're remembering that most college students do not misuse medication, and so many of them are walking away with learning something and wanting to share that information with others, which is still wonderful. So they're pledging to spread awareness or just teach others safe medication practices, discuss risks associated with misuse behaviors with others. Many of them talk about maybe going back to their home communities and sharing these messages with others outside of their campus community. Another 23% indicate that they're just more self-aware about risks associated with medication misuse, and they'll just make more well-informed choices as it relates to medication use. And then another 23% shown here in purple indicate just following those safe medication practices. So kind of indicating that they have the intent to take their medications as prescribed, only for the reason prescribed, not sharing them, and then safely storing or disposing of them. And as Kyle mentioned, he kind of got us started on that conversation about appropriate use of the funds. And so I wanted to just give you a little bit more information related to that and some examples from past campus grantees. So we really do see kind of 4 spaces where the funds will be utilized. And I think Kyle actually hit on all of them. The main way that we see the funds utilized is through a promotional item. And these are items that are really extending the reach of the Generation RX key messages outside of those educational programs. So for example, we often see like magnets being designed and purchased, posters being designed and purchased that can be utilized in other spaces or at other events, or in ways to just kind of extend the reach, as I said, of those key messages, those safe medication practices. So for example, this first image is a magnet, the University of Rhode Island, that specifically focused on securing medications through safe storage and disposal. And they actually posted these magnets in residence halls and great chapter houses throughout campus. We also see another space is incentives. So this is giveaways, right? If you attend the Generation RX program, whether that's in person or virtually, you'll receive blank. And so magnets, again, have also been a popular giveaway. This, again, that context of safe medication practices tends to be the focus. This is an example of one from the University of Dayton. But we also see a lot of swag items. So you know your students the best and what will incentivize and encourage them to attend the program, but also leave with something that allows them to reflect on the messages shared. The other 2 spaces are food, and that obviously, as you have in-person programming, tends to be a little heavier, and then supplies and printing. So just a couple more examples within those spaces. East Carolina University again, thinking outside of those required 10 educational programs, they spent some of their funds on printing posters that they shared at a tabling event. So this was an opportunity to not only extend the reach of the Generation RX key messages by sharing these posters, but it also allowed them to promote their upcoming 10 educational programs to encourage attendance. We also have seen printing costs, as I mentioned. So the University of North Alabama created flyers. So this was kind of pre-COVID. They posted these flyers across campus. So they utilized part of the funds to print these flyers, but most of their funds, you can see that they advertise providing food at the 10 educational programs. So a lot of their funding went towards providing food. The past year, the campuses that had to quickly adapt during spring 2020, many of those campuses utilized the funds in similar ways, but through recognition of that virtual delivery of the program. So they would encourage students to, for example, I know like if they were presenting to students that lived in a dormitory, one campus had students show up and they picked up a personal pan pizza. And then they went back to their dorm to eat their dinner and attend the Generation RX program. So the funds were used for food in that context. Other campuses have, after you attend the Generation RX program, you receive like a code to utilize for a free meal, like at a campus eatery. And then giveaways have been distributed even virtually. So I know it's one campus, like every 10 minutes, they stopped and raffled off like a giveaway and found a way to get those to the students. So even despite COVID and having more virtual delivery of the Generation RX programs over this past year, we still saw the funds being utilized in those kind of same 4 areas. And that kind of brings me back to the grant proposal. So hopefully you feel like you have a little bit more information to help you address those first 2 bullets. And if you think about those outcomes and really those key messages that Generation RX is delivering through the programs, if you look at the last bullet, how will the programming fit into the overall institution-wide efforts promoting wellness and safety? Hopefully you can see how those Generation RX key messages nicely complement the efforts that your campus is doing within that space. And I think with that, we're kind of at the end of the presentation. We'd be happy to continue to answer questions, and I'll turn it over to Cindy to moderate that.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So now is the time for questions. We have had quite a few questions come in, and Kyle's been busy answering those in the Q&A box. And so if you have a question, it's very likely that someone else on the webinar has already asked that as well. I may revisit a couple of these that I think are probably questions that multiple people may have. I know as we were talking about funding, we had a couple of questions come in related to funding and restrictions around funding. You mentioned how people have been using funds, but we haven't talked as much about what is restricted from funding. Perhaps you could, Kyle, you could review a little bit about things that are discouraged in terms of budget line items for the grant.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, anything that is like something that would be a resource for the office or outside programming other than Generation RX. So like I said, like this, the medication safes and other things like that. I had a question about paying students. We've definitely shied away and have not funded or have had the campus strike that line item because there's lots of student leaders that are available to facilitate the programs or graduate students or other things, but we don't want this to go to pay for honorariums or stipends from the budget. So those are 2 of the big ones. Also diversify. If everything is food, then, you know, again, the points that are awarded in that category might be less because we want to see a broad use of the money, not just all on one thing or buying t-shirts for the facilitators or something like that. Like, we want to see diversified use of it to incentivize and get people to the program, and then a resource or a takeaway from the program. The magnets are great. Like the Rhode Island one, I love those when I saw that in the report. That's a really cool use of the money.
I think another important thing to note here is indirect costs are also excluded from the grant. So you're not allowed to use any of the funds for indirect costs because the funding amount is so low. So that is noted in the budget and in the application. So if you need to provide that information to your grants office, for example, that is available in there. And I think, let's see, we had our last question is back to evaluations. Those evaluation questions and the outcome pieces that you provided. Molly, can you just share one more time about how campuses would have access to that evaluation content and who is designing those evaluations?
Sure. So the Higher Education Center, as part of their administrative responsibilities of this grant, they really are the ones that are designing that survey instrument. It is pretty short right now. It consists of a series of statements that students report knowledge gains related to on a Likert-based scale. And then it's those two open-ended questions that you saw me share some outcomes with. So in total, it probably right now takes under 5 minutes for a student to complete. And most of the time, the way that campuses are supporting participants complete that survey, I provide the campus with a customizable Qualtrics link. So for example, it'll say like go.osu.edu/Duquesne University. And we would encourage you to throw that up at the end of the program, and students can use their own personal device to maybe take the survey while they're still with you, if you're doing an in-person program. If it's virtually, throw the link in the chat thread and encourage folks to take the survey. We also provide you with a QR code if that is helpful to you. I don't know how many campuses have actually leveraged it. But just know that we're not holding you accountable, that every student that sits in the program also takes the survey. I will tell you that most students actually do take it, and we're very appreciative of that data. So we do ask that you kind of put it forth as a requirement, but we recognize that some students just aren't going to do it, and we understand that.
Great. Well, I think that is all of our questions today. I just want to thank Kyle, Molly, and Brittany for sharing more about this opportunity. We encourage everyone to submit their applications for consideration. As Kyle mentioned, this year we're funding twice the amount of campuses as we have historically. We'll be funding 10 different campuses, so more opportunity to receive those funds. Applications are due at the end of the month on May 28th at 5 o'clock Eastern time, and information about how to submit your application